My name is Ihron Rensburg, former Vice-Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg and a Senior Associate of South Africa's Higher Education Leadership and Management Program, or HELM as we know it. I greet you from a sunny, not so warm, but sunny London. And on behalf of our host, HELM, a program of University of South Africa, I extend a very warm welcome to each one of our speakers, panelists, participants, and organizers who are joining us from across our planet. We're most grateful that you've been able to find the time to join us for the second Summit Day, and we look forward to hosting you as we engage personal, collective, and institutional learning, disruption, synthesis, growth, and development. Allow me again to extend a warm welcome to our Summit co-host and colleagues from the Council of Arts and Sciences, or CAS, the National Association of Deans of the Arts and Sciences in the United States of America. So today we continue our dialogue and learning on the important theme, leading organizational change for sustainability and development in higher education. And I ask that we keep this top of mind as we make our way through the summit program. As our summit outline reminds us, the conflicts across the globe, including Ukraine and Syria, and in many other places, highlight our shared vulnerability, heightened uncertainties, and how highly interconnected we are as societies, economically, socially, politically, and culturally. The ways in which the geopolitical context is framed shapes sustainability, development, and change. And higher education is impacted by these changes in profound manners in terms of its core mission, financial sustainability, and economic and social relevance. This complex, changing context raises several leading questions, such as how do we locate higher education and its leadership to advance sustainability and development? Second, how can higher education leadership enhance its collaborative efforts for national, global change and stability? And thirdly, what leadership frameworks can guide our thinking? And in turn, how can we as higher education leaders monitor and evaluate our contributions as we explored the important contextual factors that are relevant and significant manners shaping our higher education agenda, both from the outside in and from the inside out. Against the backdrop of rising populist nationalism, racism, xenophobia and exclusion, geopolitical and economic crises, rivalry and polarities, to the importance of acknowledging and nurturing the idea of knowledges and pluralism, and of decolonization as an important means for resetting the concept of knowledges in the South and in the North. Across to the impact of new science and technologies on knowledge production that should be carefully evaluated and addressed. We also learned that universities are the preeminent institutions for advancing constitutional democracies and social and economic justice and inclusion, such as, for example, enabling South Africa's democracy to advance its mission in respect of its Bill of Rights and its constitutional democracy. We learned that the higher education system lacks capacity to meet explosive and rising demand over the next part of the century. That the quality of higher education requires urgent consideration and attention in terms of its impact on graduates' job and career opportunities, both known and future. We learned that higher education has a new and expanded role in upskilling, retooling, and alternative credentialing. That on the health, climate, environment, and social grand challenges, higher education research is simply not yet suited for mounting an appropriate response. And that this requires a shift to a focus on solving local problems as research and student engagement, and engaging in effective partnerships with peer institutions and the private sector. And finally, we learned that existing economic models reinforce the under and defunding of higher education, thus exacerbating privatization, exclusion, interinstitutional funding gaps, infrastructure and talent gaps, such as between historically Black institutions and historically white institutions. And that internation gaps are also exacerbated when considering participation, graduation, and research and innovation systems and outputs. We also learned from the personal leadership journeys of colleagues about their leadership and organizing frameworks and what motivates them. And they shared their insights on transformational leadership, on the roles of visioning, strategy development, and strategic plans in achieving shared ambitions, the importance of being leadership role models that listen, are caring, and who continuously learn, adapt, and are agile, to acknowledging that leadership is distributed within their teams and across the institution. And they shared with us how to mobilize and achieve leadership and strategy alignment. And finally, we learned about how colleagues lead in crisis. And so, colleagues and friends, today we turn to examining within concurrent or parallel sessions the themes of academic leadership and management, how to transition into leadership roles, student success, leadership hotspots, mental health and self-care in the academe, and enabling institutional cultures. Before we return to the plenary session later on to learn from academic teams on how they lead from the challenging middle of their institutions. While all went fairly well yesterday, there was one important ingredient missing. We did not have the participation level that we've been hoping for. And so my appeal today is that we make full use of our chat boxes and the technologies there to share key insights that we have learned from a session, to sharing insights from our own experience, to applauding a light bulb moment, and to sharing some key words that come to mind as we reflect on the presented insights. We would share all of these in the summit program. Kindly note that your questions are equally welcome and are an important part of our deliberations. We request that you kindly post these in the chat box, and our virtual hosts will communicate these to the session hosts. Should you wish anyone in particular of the panelists to comment or to respond to a question, we request that you kindly indicate whose insights you may wish to have. So we wish you all of the very best, and may this be for each one of us another day of learning, sharing, and growing. Please join concurrent session, the first concurrent session, on the tab on the right-hand side of your screen. And once completed, that is the concurrent session, you've joined it, and it's completed, we request that you return to the main plenary page again, and then select your next concurrent session. Once that is completed, we request that you then return again to the plenary page. And on that note, I extend our sincere appreciation to you for listening and wish you a fantastic day of learning, sharing, and growing. I thank you.
Good day to everyone who is joining us on this session. Today's session is called Special Challenge of Mid-Level Managers in Higher Education. We have a panel of 3 deans that will be speaking and addressing the topic of the challenges of mid-level managers in higher education. I am Dolores Guerrero, and I am a professor at a university in the United States, Texas A&M University, Kingsville. I serve as dean for the College of Arts and Sciences. On our campus, the College of Arts and Sciences includes 11 units, 10 academic units, and also a museum. So, which is our kind of living learning lab for our humanities and our social sciences. I have a array of programs under my responsibility. Our structure is, we have 5 colleges in our university. Our enrollment is about 6,500. The college has about 1,800 students, about 150 faculty, 160 faculty. Again, we have arts, humanities, we have the social sciences, we have clinical sciences, and then the sciences and math. So it's a very diverse unit. I have 2 associate deans. And so we're also kind of all realigning ourselves currently in terms of post-pandemic. So for today's panel, the structure is I'll have each of our panelists will introduce themselves and speak somewhat to their roles and responsibilities. And then we're gonna begin a conversation on some specific questions. And then we'll encourage our participants to ask questions in those areas. We want to cover a few different topics. I think we can all identify challenges, but we're hoping to also have some conversation of opportunities. What these challenges, we have challenges, but there's also opportunities as higher education is being transformed, as we're going through some transformation and changes in higher ed. Some of it just because where we are in our history of higher ed, and also post-pandemic, and the impact that has had and some changes those have had. So I will start with having our panelists introduce themselves, and I will ask Dr. Ramakrishna just to go first.
Right. Thank you, Dolores, and good. Well, it's night now in Singapore, so good evening to all of you from Singapore. Very so wet day, wet evening today. Good to be here with all of you at the HELM CCAS event. My name is Kumar Ramakrishna, and I'm a professor of national security studies as well as a Provost chair in national security studies, as well as associate dean in charge of policy studies in the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, based in Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. So the Rajaratnam School of International Studies, or RSIS for short, for your background, is both a graduate school of international affairs as well as a think tank. So we have about 250 students. So we don't have any undergrads, just postgraduate students. We have about 30 faculty and about 60 to 70 senior researchers who are on the fellow track, right? So essentially, we are very policy-oriented school and think tank, but because we are in the university and academic institution, our colleagues, my colleagues, have to produce research for essentially three audiences: our academic peers, government, national security practitioners and policymakers, as well as the general public. So we are very heavily involved in public education as well. For myself, I've spent about 22 years in RSIS. Of that 22 years, I've spent more than a decade working in the think tank part of RSIS. And so I've interacted extensively with the policy world. In more recent times, I've been moving back into the more traditional academic space where interacting with university colleges is the norm. As Associate Dean in charge of policy studies, what essentially that means is I kind of pay a fair bit of attention to the think tank track, because many of our researchers have to, as I mentioned, produce research, not just for other academics, but also for government audiences, the general public. So the research has to be dual use, right? I mean, they have to be able to be flexible and intellectually nimble to be able to function well in both the traditional academic space as well as the policy-oriented space. So, for example, I'm also head of the International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research within the school. And currently, I'm research advisor to a smaller program, which is called the National Security Studies Program, that actually does a lot more on the education front with younger civil servants. So it's quite a broad portfolio with different elements. Yeah, so maybe I'll stop there. It basically, I think, gives you an idea of what I've been doing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Moodley?
Thank you so much, Dolores, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I am the Executive Dean at the Faculty of Arts and Design at the Tshwane University of Technology, and I'm Associate Professor in that faculty as well. I have very briefly been Assistant Dean for the Faculty of Arts for about 5 years, and then Executive Dean for another 5 years. Briefly about the faculty has 5 departments in performing arts and design. So we cover really all the performing arts, from music and dance to theater arts and design. And we have design studies, which covers fashion design and jewelry. The Department of Visual Communication, which looks at film studies, multimedia design or integrated communication design and commercial photography. We have traditional fine and studio arts, and really one of the highlights in that department is that we have the only glass blowing teaching program in South Africa. And we also have the Department of Interior Design. So we have 5 departments, 11 programs, approximately 2,000 students, and about 110 staff, with quite a substantial part-time staff as well. The role as dean is quite diverse. We really are the academic managers. I have in my office an assistant dean in teaching and learning, who assists in managing the academic project, student success, graduation, etc., but also managing facilities and infrastructure issues, as well as, staffing and student challenges, and really trying to ensure that our programs are really cutting edge. We also promote research at a level that we really believe should be impactful, so that it has an impact on society, it grows our curriculum, it advances the curriculum so that our students are not only locally recognized, but they are globally competitive as well. Our faculty also has the Center for Creative Industries, which houses the Faculty Doctoral Academy, Master's Academy, that really ensures that we promote and produce our doctoral and master's staff. We're also developing in the Center for Creative Industries a research hub, both for researchers and for students. And in our teaching and learning, we're trying to really springboard ourselves from the lessons that COVID has taught us in a very short time, to recognize that in the arts, we can really be adaptable. And we've proven to be really agile in recognizing how we can move some of our programs into an online space during very difficult times. We have HODs in every department and section heads that also manage the challenges that COVID brought us, but also how we use that in order to streamline what we're doing currently. So the lessons we've learned from COVID can't be just for COVID. We've got to be able to harness those and strategize moving forward in terms of technologies that advance the teaching and learning project. So I'll pause there. Thanks, Dolores.
Thank you. Thank you. And our third panelist is Dr. Rizzi.
Thank you, and hello everyone. I hail from Australia, Melbourne, where it's 12:30 a.m. So apologies if I might struggle at times in the next 90 minutes or so. But it's great to be here. So I'm Associate Dean Research at the University of Melbourne, and specifically Associate Dean of the Faculty of Arts. It's a big faculty, but Australia tends to have big faculties. By big, I mean I work with about 600 colleagues, 600 academic colleagues, and we have approximately 5,000 students in our faculty. There are 10 faculties in our university. We have approximately 55,000 students, so it's a fairly big operation. And within my faculty, there are 5 schools. We cover pretty much every discipline in the humanities and social sciences. Every school has different sizes, but with slightly different sort of governance arrangements, but they all work under the same, we all work under the same faculty. I work closely, so of course I focus on research, but I work closely with other associate deans. There are 5, so for us, education, research, partnership, Indigenous, and diversity and inclusion are the key portfolios, all working very closely with each other. And we also have strategies that intersect and interact. The idea is that we don't look at just one aspect of what we do, but we have to sort of try to work together horizontally, if that makes any sense, in every step we take. I also should say that I am the convener of the Australia and New Zealand network of deputy and associate deans, which is part of the also Australia New Zealand Council of Deans of Arts, Social Sciences and Humanities. So I'm sort of representing those 2 groups as well today. I think I'll stop there because I want to get into the discussion. But it's quite interesting to see how all these sort of presenters have, work in different and yet very compatible environments.
Thank you very much. And that was, I think that just kind of gives us some context, I think, for us to have this conversation. So one of the beginning questions, I heard as you each described, we're all dealing with academics, we deal with facilities, we deal with financial, administrative, organizational. And so as a MIT, I guess my question would be, what do you each see as the current challenges or upcoming challenges in your role in higher education? I can, for myself, being a dean, I have somebody I report to. For us, it would be a provost or vice president. And then I also, of course, have department chairs and then faculty in the college. So what do you see as your roles, which are similar but with distinct differences based on where we're at? What are some of the challenges that come immediately to mind for you at this point in time? And I'll let whoever wants to take that question first.
I can get the ball rolling, I guess.
Okay.
Right. I think that's a wonderful question to start off. I mean, for myself, as I mentioned, at least in my school, as Associate Dean Policy Studies, I mean, there's a real need to ensure that whatever research our faculty, and not just our faculty, which is basically those on the professorial track, but also those on the fellow track as well, senior fellows, research fellows. There's a real need to ensure that we don't create a culture where academics just write for other academics. I mean, that is important when you think in terms of ensuring that there is that international scholarly academic credibility of the output of our researchers. But at the same time, we, as a school which is supposed to ensure that our research is, digestible by a wider community, not just the policy community, the practitioners, which is a big group for us, but also the general public. I think one of the big challenges people like myself in my position face is to ensure that we can foster a culture where our academics are, number one, able to be versatile, that they can translate their academic research into forms that non-specialist practitioners, or even the educated but non-specialist public members of the public can also consume. So number one is the ability, the acumen to do that. Number two is the willingness, because I'm sure other colleagues here would have encountered, many situations where some researchers would say that, well, I'm just comfortable just producing for an academic audience, whereas others would say, well, no, I'm a think tank guy. I'll stick to being a think tank guy, and I don't like jargon, and I want to ensure that my work is comprehensible to as wide an audience as possible. But if people who say that won't really go far in a university context as well. So it's a real challenge trying to foster norms and a climate where researchers are, to me, in today's world, I think a big challenge is to try to ensure that the good research that many of our colleagues produce is not just consumed within a small group, but it's more widely disseminated to educate the wider community, whether they are policymakers or even the general public as well. So I'll just stop there.
Can I jump in, Dolores?
Yes, please.
Thank you. I think that's a critical question around, and as you intimated at the beginning, there are so many challenges. So the challenge now is to lift up those that are absolutely critical. The one that our colleague has referred to is about research and impactful research, because we don't want the research to sit on the shelves of the libraries or in journals, but to actually translate into projects that improve and impact societies and communities, affect industry and government, and ensure that we have the policies that will then roll out the kind of impact that research should have. And in there lies the real critical quadruple helix, where universities, government, industry, and communities need to work together in order to have an output that's actually going to have a long-term impact. So one of the challenges in the arts, and as I indicated, I'm in the performing and visual arts, is to grow that research in a way that doesn't affect critical creative output. So a lot of the time, staff in our faculty, for example, are performers. They are either performers or they're artists, as in they're practitioners. And the challenge is always, how do we create interest in actually growing research in the arts by practitioners who see their primary role as practitioners, as performers, and really as teachers. Recently, we've had a change in the structure in the process in which our research output has been adjusted to accommodate creative output. So we have creative research output, which recognizes that artists and artistic teachers in universities, then they can then make submissions to ensure that their research through their performative experiences can then be translated and recognized as research in a sort of traditional sense. So it's trying to grow that capacity, which really is not an easy task because it's funding dependent, it's time dependent, it needs time outside of classrooms, and all of that has to be facilitated through funding. And the funding pool for students and staff is always diminishing, and that is an ongoing, consistent challenge. And therein lies the challenge for the faculty to generate funds. To generate funds, apply for funding, to make sure we are ready whenever a call comes out with very high level applications. So our Center for Creative Industries is now going to be used as that research hub, although the university itself has a directorate that deals with that. But the faculty needs to target very specific funding opportunities to ensure that we deliver on what is required in the faculty, whether that is scholarship funding for our students or scholarship funding for our staff who also want to embark on master's and doctoral studies. In order to relieve them of their classroom duties, we need funding to ensure that they can then be, the classes can then continue in their absence. The other challenge is to sort of leverage technologies and the technological leaps that we have taken and that has been channeled through COVID to universities needs to be leveraged at a higher level. Not only did students go on a very sharp learning curve, but so did the staff. And the technologies are slowly being transformed to ensure that we're able to teach diverse arts classes on technologically advanced platforms. It's still a challenge, but it's one that we're working very carefully to ensure that we make some headway. I'll pause there. Thank you.
If I just come in, I think that there's a really exciting and interesting points raised, I think, in both contributions. I just would like to take a step back because I think across the globe there have been several discussion, conversation, publications around impact, what it is, what it does, why do we need to do more impactful teaching, more impactful research. And I think several scholars like Mark Reed and others have engaged with this, and I think we all as middle managers have to carry on that agenda and try to push it. But where exactly? Where are we going with it? And I think one of the challenges that I think we face in our roles is to own a clear understanding what impact is. And also enable our colleagues and students to understand what impact is, what impact pathways might look like. So there are different kinds of impacts, obviously. The key benefit is to benefit our society, global, local. I think we should all agree, generally speaking, with that statement, but then how one get to that, I think, is the big question. And I think the point about funding is a really important one, because there are, at least in Australia, but I'm sure in other parts of the world, there are some funding bodies, some public, state owned, governed funding bodies that are pushing for less research on discovery, so the pure research, and more onto applied research. And especially, of course, on the STEM side, that's become particularly clear. It doesn't mean necessarily that humanities and social sciences are getting less money, but there is a stronger sense that there needs to be an almost immediate application of scholarly research. I think that's inevitable, but I think it's important also to recognize that scholarly research, good quality research, is what then enables impact. We can't do anything until we produce very high quality research and very high quality teaching. The two things, I think, should go together. And so I think making it possible for academics, teachers, students to actually own what universities understand as impact and quality, which are not, as I said, a dichotomy, they go together, is really important, because otherwise we'll be imposing criteria, we'll be imposing strategies that are coming from the top, and academics will not actually, in the worst case scenario, will not understand what they mean, or in some cases it will actually be against them. They will feel that their research or their careers are being threatened by directions or agendas that they don't believe in. So I think that's a real problem and risk, and it does require, I think, a lot of thinking, a lot of work, collegial work, to try to actually get institutions like universities to understand exactly where they go, where they want to go, how they want to work, co-produce work and teaching with communities, with practitioners, and what goals do we have? We all want to improve the world, but what aspects, what problems are we going to address? And perhaps also share those goals so that different universities can do different things, can focus on different aspects, sustainability, famine, climate change, and so on. So I think that there's something there, I think, that I've engaged with, but it's certainly one of the biggest struggles. And I would just add, as a provocation, perhaps, or as a way to sort of to continue this conversation, that another big challenge is trust. I don't know, in my three and a half year experience, I feel that also in the leadership role, there's a real importance in making sure that in a very diverse faculty or university, that there's a sense that there's reciprocal trust in what we decide to do, in how we understand the research or teaching that we carry out, and how we can make sure that not only our colleagues trust us, but we trust them as well. And I'll give you an example very quickly. I recently learned that we have all these funding arrangements at university level, but all those funding levels, until recently anyway, are very much predicated on the assumption that if you give academics freedom to use, let's say, a small budget, they will most likely try to find ways to use the money in ways that might not be considered appropriate. And so these constant checks, red tape, to try to make sure that funding is always used absolutely now to the last dollar as the university or our faculty expect. And very, very often a lot of money goes into actually that red tape rather than actually putting the money where it would be most useful. And it comes from an assumption that, yes, there's little trust, or that effectively that notion of empowering academics or teams has to be governed in a very strict, controlled way. And it's one of the many challenges, but I thought it's an interesting one. And I think also when we decide where to go with research and teaching, I think sometimes there is a lack of trust. Things seem to be imposed from above and not actually shared properly. I'll stop there.
Okay. No, I think these are excellent points, and I kind of like to do a little follow-up with that. I think that as I was listening to each of you, my question would be, so what strategies, what are we currently doing, or what are you doing in terms of some strategies to address the desire or the goal of moving toward, impactful research and defining that. And we need the scholarship before we can create that. And so I heard from each of you kind of that challenge of that message really being adopted across the systems. And so I think your last statement, Andrea, empowering faculty versus the restrictive kind of model, the bureaucratic kind of models, the checklist of this, you can only do it this way, the trust and building that reciprocal trust through the system. In our positions, that is a challenge. So I guess my question to y'all is, you can tell I'm from Texas. I said y'all. I don't even think about it when I hear it. And so what kind of strategies have you implemented, utilized, or conversations that you're having at your universities to kind of address that? Or is it something we're thinking of, but is there some action being proposed? Whoever wants to respond to that. I'm thinking specific strategies that we could.
I can come in. Well, okay, in terms of, it's kind of related to what Andrea was talking about as well, about the trust, reciprocal trust. That really resonates with me. In my role, Associate Dean, Policy Studies, I have to engage a fair amount of time with funding agencies in order to try and persuade the government, usually the government agencies, to fund particular projects which some of my colleagues may be interested in doing better. For example, it's cyber security, or nowadays there's a lot of interest in hybrid warfare, for example. We talk about Russia, Ukraine, right? So there's a lot of interest in that kind of thing. So I find that one of the challenges is it really depends on personalities. If the interlocutor on the government side has had experience working with academics, it's usually significantly easier, because at least the government side, they understand how academics work. So that's a lot easier. If on the other hand, and in government sectors, it's quite common for rotation. These, after a few years, new people come in, right? And then they have different views and they have different experiences. If you come across interlocutors who may not have had that much experience working with academia, then the trust issue becomes quite salient. Don't really know what these guys are going to do with the funds, and so they want to perhaps impose more checks, or they want to consult with you a lot, and that would then create tensions between the funding agency side and the research team. Yeah. So the way to sort of address that is, I can't think of any other way but to essentially communicate, go for informal meetings, coffee, lunches, to sort of build rapport, and over time, hopefully, there's some kind of mutual understanding and comfort level that develops. It can happen. I've had the opportunity to experience this myself. It can happen, it has happened, so it's good news, I think. But you got to work. This is something which I think associate deans or deans, at least in my view, would have to invest some time and energy to do, to sort of create a climate with relevant agencies, funding agencies, where a level of trust emerges, which would then smoothen the work of the research team. Yeah. That's what I think I'll just stop there.
Okay.
The question that Andrea raised around trust, it also resonates with me. Mm-hmm. I think it's really critical, because there's trust and reciprocal trust on so many levels. It's the trust above, so we understand what our managers expect of us, and that there's transparency in that process. It's the trust we have with our HODs and departments, but also the trust with our students. And students are a critical stakeholder here, that we really, it's the kind of line between discontentment and protests and transparency. The moment we have transparency, we understand each other. There's a collective understanding of what the challenges are. And if that challenge, for example, is the funding formula through government public funding, students need to understand why they won't get this funding, why they won't get that, why their levies and lab fees will be paying for this and not for that. There needs to be that very deep understanding through the student leadership and the broader student population, that there's a critical understanding of where our formulas are, where we are in terms of establishing the funding that is required for whatever they might need. Trust is also, I think, critical in our partnerships in the industries. We have, for example, and you asked about strategies to address the impactfulness of our research. We have at our university and many universities in South Africa, work integrated learning which is experiential learning for students. And through that, we really need to have partnerships with industry. And we engage our industry through advisory boards. And we meet these advisory boards twice in a year. And what that does, it's a reciprocal arrangement. So the university and the departments then offer where the research is going in the discipline, while the industry will thus respond and say, look, in the industry, this is what's cutting edge, but we don't have students or we don't have employable staff with those requisite skills. That can then in turn influence our curriculum in terms of how we revise our curriculum. And that is a critical cog in the wheel, because curriculum needs to be regularly revised so that the research, both in the university and what's happening in industry, will be able to translate into something that is impactful through our advisory boards, through our work into integrated learning. Fundamentally, we need to have impact at a broad level for the universities here as a public good. And that's the purpose of it. So for me, I think the research, we even set up in many universities research chairs, whether that be in climate change and security studies, as our colleague has just mentioned. Those are critical because the research is then focused and zooms in onto and into what can have an impact in society and in the communities that are facing particular challenges, such as the quality of water, for example. So I think there needs to be a degree of transparency and absolute and open communication, because we really are here for the public good, utilizing public funds as well. Thanks, Dolores. I'll pause there.
If I could just follow on that, I completely agree. That's a really very powerful and exciting, clear exposition of the sort of pathway, how one can, as an institution, but also as a leader, drive impactfulness. I think what I would add is that there are these important, crucial connections as faculties, universities make certain decisions about how they want to work with the community, whether it's global, regional, local, and the decisions that are made around what projects, what collaborations. I think that's become more and more clear that universities and their partners want more clarity around what exactly is university doing, or what are the aspirations of university. There's a really important example, for instance, from the BP Institute at the University of Cambridge, that is now a very problematic partnership, and students made it very clear that they were not happy with that partnership. They didn't want the university to engage with a particular kind of partner. Fossil fuel is an issue, it's a major issue. So there are big decisions that need to be informed by the aspirations and the commitment that universities make, how they're going to respond to big challenges that we all face in our society. From a strategic point of view, I think, and this is sort of from my own experience, what has happened is that university every few years produces a main strategy with some big aspirations, but then they always need to be translated at a more local level, where research teams or faculties, divisions, whatever they're called, they need to somehow connect with that strategy and actually own those strategies in a way that is very productive, and then also communicate that to their partners and stakeholders outside the university. So what we have done is that on the one side, the university, my university, done a lot of work to actually understand impact and try to provide deep scholarly understanding of what impact is and what we mean by it, and has come up with our own definition of impact, the 5 areas of impact that go from commercialization, which is probably the most popular at the moment because it brings money, to the scholarly impact, which is also incredibly important, and they all connect in different ways. But once you have that, what we did is actually we went to every single school and we asked them to think very carefully. They had a year to think about impact and quality as a sort of an important connection in their own disciplines and program. And we asked them to articulate pathway towards impact and quality from their perspective, which gave them a chance to actually own their understanding of what those kind of pathway. How do they engage the quality of their research, the quality of their teaching? What does that become for our community, for our society? And it has created a lot of really exciting conversation, which I think next year will then bring, and if you like, a coalescing of those different ideas in a way that hopefully will be productive and would allow us to be much clearer when we go out and work with our partners, with industries and others, very clear about who we are, what we believe in, and what we are supporting. And I think that's sort of already creating some pretty exciting directions around, for instance, sustainability, climate change. So we have various groups, whether it's teaching or research, that are focusing very much on specific issues around those big problems, big challenges. Peace building is another one, for instance. And I think that what that will turn out will make it possible is to be also clearer about how we can support. Not only support big projects and initiatives, but also support those, as I said, the pathways towards impact and quality. It will make it easy to plan, both for individuals and teams, understand more clearly what kind of steps does one need to take. Because the problem I've been facing for a number of years is that there is an assumption that the only way you can be successful in research is if you just get millions of dollars, external or from internal, in order to achieve amazing things. But there are many steps in between. The goal is not to make money necessarily, but to actually make a difference, contribute to some really important projects and to the benefit of our community and society.
Thank you all. I think, some of what I hear is really, as a strategy, is redefining, re-envisioning, clarifying to across the systems, by asking the programs, the disciplines, to kind of define the pathways from their perspective, I think is a really empowering way and to engage individuals in the change. I think that it is change in the system, at least in higher education in the United States or in my area. It's revisiting how we have our conversations regarding these kind of processes, and where do they situate? Do they sit at my lap and above, or do we really have conversations with faculty to discuss discipline-based? And I like the word creating those pathways, because then it's intentional, one, it's I have a stake in this. So, I had a say in this, and I'm committed to making those kind of changes. There's still a lot of learning, I think, a lot of education in terms of making shifts in higher ed, I think, from being more responsive in the moment, versus having kind of this longer, slow process that happens. The world is just moving a lot faster than that. So I think you all have very significant strategies that are going on in your campuses, and that's reflective, I think, of the change in higher ed. And I guess I have one more question regarding this. In terms of yourself, in your role as associate dean or executive dean, where are you seeing the challenges in specifically in facilitating and moderating these kind of conversations and strategies? Or is there any challenges with that? I'm asking more in terms of as a in a leadership position for yourselves, if that makes any sense. I mean, because I think it's requiring change in even our leadership and how we lead for some, you know, to really facilitate some of these questions. So any thoughts on that?
I think that's a very relevant question, and I really like what Andrea was saying about the defining what impact is and working backwards from that. What are the pathways to generating those kind of impacts? I mean, I'll be very interested if you know, perhaps Andrea could share a bit more about the five definitions of KPIs of impact. I mean, he mentioned commercialization, of course, and scholarship. I mean, the other three will be of interest, I think, to me and my colleagues as well. But I mean, to answer Dolores' question, this kind of exercise to sort of like provide a strategic, a common strategic frame for the entire university to follow. For example, this idea of, you know, okay, we have these 5 impact indicators and we want to operationalize this across the university. That kind of task would, I think, tend to fall on the dean's office, right? So the university says, okay, we have, for example, these 5 impact indicators. So you guys at the dean's level go and make it happen. So that's where the challenge will occur, because then when you get into the nitty-gritty of, you know, going down to the various departments, I mean, we have the Homeland Security people who would have their views, the counterterrorism folks would have their views, religious harmony folks would have other views, and sometimes these views may not always gel. I mean, understandably, because they come from different perspectives and disciplines. So operationalizing the strategic frame, that would take a fair bit of time. And this ties in what we've been discussing about trust, right? I mean, if within the school, you know, there's a good level of trust and mutual respect between dean's office and various department heads, I think that kind of a collegial climate would really help in operationalizing such a strategic frame developed by the top senior management of the university. But if that kind of climate is still a work in progress, then I think it becomes a real challenge. That is what I think.
Okay.
So perhaps I can, it seems to be a nice order going. But also to just quickly say that our strategic plan, and I think it was a comment you asked or a question you asked earlier on, is a 5-year plan, and faculties then have to find ways in which to operationalize and deliver on those, which is quite an interesting way of doing it, so that it doesn't shift every year. I mean, they're micro kind of shifts, but then there's nothing at a big level, at a macro level. But also to go back to the question around impactful research projects and the challenges in the dean's environment and in our leadership, and what type of leadership that requires in moderating that. And I really believe that right now we need some sort of purposeful leadership. At the moment that we, you know, there are lots of leadership styles and so on, but if you have a purposeful leadership agenda, if there is, you know, a challenge in the world, and Andrea mentioned climate change and so on, but in South Africa we have this escalating numbers of GBV incidences. So globally we're dealing with climate change, and my question always to our staff and in my thinking around what the strategy should be for the faculty is what role can this faculty play in plugging some of those gaps, those really macro global scale challenges. This small faculty on the southern tip of Africa, what real change can it make? And I think when there's a purpose attached to, even if it is a curriculum or if it's the research agenda or the community engagement projects, we really need to figure out how we drive higher education purposefully. I mean, oftentimes we look at the STEM as those critical leaders, those hard sciences that can drive real change. They're the experts in climate change, and they're the experts in ways in which we can shift the dialogue. But there definitely are spaces for the arts and humanities and the social sciences in creating awareness programs, in creating different types of thinking. But how do we shift even at that very micro level? How do we create moments of activism along those real big global challenges, those big challenges that affect all of us? And how do we build that into a curriculum that's really impactful? So it's not only impactful research, and we seem to be talking about impactful research, but it's about impactful teaching and learning that leads to a sense of global citizenship. Whether we come from, you know, the hard sciences or soft sciences, we need to think at that level. And it leads very beautifully back into the notion of trust. We are being entrusted with the young people of the future, and we should find critical, purposeful ways to lead them into a future that, by all intents and purposes, is in a precarious situation right now. I'll pause there.
Yeah, thanks, Nalini. That was really, really interesting. I agree. It's not just about impactful research. Teaching is perhaps even more important. And I just put a note in the message about the fact that perhaps some of the things, I mean, I can't generalize, but at least from my perspective, one of the things that universities that I've experienced don't do very well is to actually listen, rather than just imposing or translating its own research into the community, into the industries and so on, but actually to listen and understand what are the problems from the community perspective, and what can we do to help, rather than just doing it the other way around and deciding what the problem is. And similarly, I think, I know it's challenging, it's not something simple and easy to do, but also to be able to listen to students and understand their perspective, and be able to then build curricula around a general sense of ownership of the problems and issues and challenges that are faced by our students and our community. I think that's a really important thing to do. I put also in the chat the 5 impacts that, by the way, just if anyone wants to have a look at it. But I think that the real question there, I think you're absolutely right. It goes back to the issue of trust. Is that more and more there's a sort of strong sense that we need to work together. There's a co-production of teaching, co-production of research, and that's the will aspect as well. It's actually bringing the teaching into the work that happens outside academia. But I think also there's a risk there as well, which is to shift the pendulum, if you like, of humanities and social sciences towards the applied aspect. I think it's also important to be very clear about the fact that the ability to think, the ability to consider a much bigger picture, and to be able to historicize a problem, or to be able to use very complex but incredibly useful and important theories, philosophical and others. These are things that are very, very important. And so again, an example is we're just about to establish a big biomedical institute, which will focus on vaccine. So multi-million-dollar operation, I think $500 million just to build the infrastructure. And we immediately realized that the whole operation revolved around biomed, and there was basically no engagement from HAS, from Humanities and Social Sciences. And so what we learned very quickly is actually advocacy is very important, that there needs to be a strong advocacy, not just within the university, but also from outside the university, where in fact, several industries, from my experience, are absolutely demanding philosophers. They want to have sociologists, they want to have anthropologists work with them. It's just that the university structures sometimes don't enable that, because the funding goes in a certain direction, and then all of a sudden there seems to be no funding to create, let's say, a co-director and a team of humanist and social scientists that can work along with the STEM colleagues. So in fact, the problem, and I feel a bit guilty about that as well, because very often it's actually not that the STEM people don't want to work with us, but very often we, and I'm talking as a humanist, a humanities person, that I don't feel that I should go and have a conversation with a scientist from, let's say, from medicine or from science. And I think that the big challenge that the leaders, I think, might want to consider more and more is to actually initiate conversations, initiate discussions, and advocate for closer collaborations, because very often the problem is not the funding, it's just a sort of a mentality or a sort of a cultural barrier, if you like, that makes it really hard for those collaborations to happen.
Thank you. And I think that's a good segue for us to talk a little more about. That was one of the topics that, when we discussed earlier, was the dichotomy, the perceived dichotomy between STEM, humanities, and the social sciences. So, your last comment was to initiate conversations at the leadership level. So what are we doing with that? What is the status of, is there intentional conversations about how we address those challenges in terms of the keeping each in their own silo, in terms of it's all STEM? I know here in the States, we're also seeing, we're having more collaborations on our campus. We have a College of Engineering, and many of the proposals that are going forward are including social sciences. Some are, and then we've got, we just had our philosophy professor get a huge national scientific foundation grant, which everybody was a little surprised with that, but it makes, he's working with scientists. And so just what you just said, it just kind of dovetails with that. So is there conversations about how to bridge those current kind of structures on your campuses? Because I think that's across all our, in higher ed. The funders, many of the funding entities are asking for interdisciplinary or are looking for collaborations. How is that? How is that looking like in your universities, or is that a conversation that is on the table that people are conscious of, aware of, and trying to address?
Can I do, Dolores, you want me to go?
Yep, we're making the little.
Yeah, this is definitely a conversation which my university is involved in, I myself personally as well, in order to get folks from the social sciences and humanities to cross the disciplinary barrier and like reach out to the science side, STEM side. We have introduced a seed grant scheme where younger researchers who are, for example, they may want to explore potential social science applications in the climate change sector. They reach out. I mean, in NTU, the university where I am, there's a very big research institute called the Earth Observatory of Singapore, EOS, and they're really big on climate change. That's their main research area. But the science itself, I mean, they are very good in the science, but the real challenge is how to communicate the science to a wider audience. So we have, for example, in the College of Humanities, a communication school, the Wee School of Communication and Information. And those researchers have reached out to the Earth Observatory of Singapore people to sort of like say that, you know, we can help perhaps try to work with you to translate that kind of science into a form which perhaps a wider community of non-specialists can understand. At the same time, my school, the Rajaratnam School, we have a very strong human security or non-traditional security research center, which looks at climate change from the perspective of the impact on the individual on the ground, human security. So the climate science people, they don't do that kind of thing. So that's where we can come in, my colleagues can come in and work with the climate science people in the EOS, the Wee School Communication Studies people, to sort of to create a research project looking at the intersection between climate change, human security, and strategic communications, if you like. And there was a research proposal we actually went through and got a seed grant. So from the university. So the idea being that start small, seed grant, maybe 20,000 Singapore dollars, right? Not much, but it's just a small proposal, test it out. If it works, then go for a bigger grant from the Social Science Research Council or the Ministry of Education grant system, you know. So it's a bigger grant. So you try it out small, works, then go for the bigger grant. Yeah, that's something which we've been trying out. Yeah.
Colleagues, I think the notion of interdisciplinary or disciplinarity is really critical to any discussion in higher education. I mean, gone are the days we work in silos. And certainly at our campus, in the arts campus, and the university at large, we've started those discussions. We've started it at some level, but in terms of our master's and doctoral students, we've currently just, well, not currently, a couple of years ago already graduated a student in ICT and arts. So there's opportunity for that sort of integration between the hard sort of sciences, whether we're looking at engineering and robotics, or whether we're looking at software design and fashion design. So there is that discussion that has started already, and we are very happy about the direction it's going in. But definitely, I think funding modes seem to be sometimes a little bit of a restrictor. But certainly conversations have started. We have even embarked on projects where we're looking at puppetry and robotics, and the synergies that can be embraced in both. I mean, a recent trip to that Dubai Expo, I'm sure many people have attended. The expansion between the relationships between arts and design and science and engineering was remarkable. But of course, a big criteria in order to realize a lot of that engagement is significant funding. I mean, the robotics puppetry collaboration, it would be and lead to revolutionizing the landscape, particularly in performing arts. However, there needs to be significant seed funding that could actually lead to such collaboration. Likewise, when we talk of, you know, portable electronic sort of pianos that seem to have a very strong science base, we're trying to allow our students engage in dialogues around how students recognize their roles coming from the arts faculty as entrepreneurs. And if there's a gap in how we can translate the arts into some sort of technology or technological advancement. As I said in the opening statements, the COVID led us to recognize the value of these portable pianos. And that's just an example of one sort of transformation. But we could look at how we transform traditional arts in ways in which we look at sound and lighting, for example. How do we allow the sciences and engineering, puppetry, robotics to engage in immersive design? And we've tried that this year at our Arts Festival. And we think that there's lots of room to grow the research and the impact of the research in that sort of collaboration, but also to grow in our master's and doctoral studies in terms of adding to that pool of resources in how technology and the arts, which is a very traditional sort of field of expertise, and sees itself married to different sciences in this regard.
Just add that there is a bit of a challenge between training, whether it's teaching or postgraduate training, professional training, and then the more advanced research, which may or may not attract funding. I think the tension is between training being very disciplinary based, which makes sense, obviously. You want to be an expert in your discipline before engaging with other fields and collaborating across. But the challenge is it actually possible to change the paradigm and generate interdisciplinary training at an earlier stage, rather than having very discipline-based teaching and training, and then expect that academics will go out and connect. That's really challenging. It's very difficult. And I think that seed funding is a really good way to, I guess, build an appetite and interest and develop some exciting ideas. But it's also quite a scary thing to do for several scholars and academics and teachers. And so I don't know, maybe there are more creative ways of doing that. And I think that Nalini, some of the examples you gave are really exciting and interesting. We have a sort of a seed funding scheme that tries to engage colleagues from my faculty, so Faculty of Arts, with colleagues in other faculties, engineering, for instance, science and medicine, and with some good results. But again, I'm going back to the idea of pathways. It needs to be done in a way that is sustainable, because early career researchers very often are the most adventurous and committed scholars, academics we have, but it's a big ask for an early career researcher to go out and engage with big teams and come up with incredibly complex and exciting ideas and methodologies. It would theoretically be easier for a more senior, more experienced academic to sort of do that, and yet that doesn't happen very often. So I think that there's some big question and challenges for middle managers. What's the best way to enable those interdisciplinary research and teaching and projects? My university has made it very clear that the only way that we can address and ideally solve big challenges is through interdisciplinary teaching and research. It's like a big statement, everyone knows that, but I think we're still a long way from actually finding and enabling ways in which those kind of research projects can be supported and enabled.
Yeah, I kind of, as you were saying, is it that we train them? Does it start at, that level versus once you're discipline based, then trying to put together the pieces? And I go back to comment earlier about students. And I think potentially a resource for us is student. And in terms of how they see the world now, what they're, when they come to the university, their perspectives, their view of the world how that works. I think we need to listen to that, you know, in terms of higher ed, in terms of change, and us being the universities demonstrating, you know, some flexibility, adaptability. So, which leads me to, I think we have time for probably one more kind of question, and that's always when we talk about now is post-COVID, post-pandemic, the impact that has had on your universities or on your leadership, in terms of, you know, we've talked about technology in teaching and in research. We had to respond, and we were reactive at the time, crisis-based, reactive kind of strategies and plans that we made. Coming to the point we are now, what did we adopt, and what did we take away as what were challenges are now really opportunities moving forward in our, not just in research, but in teaching, and also the impact that those students that are coming into our universities and their experience, and what that had as an impact on the type of student that we're working with now. I know we're having those conversations. Our students are coming with a different experience of what a classroom is, for example, and how they learn we're trying to figure out what those changes are. So I'm going to put that question as kind of our final question to each of you in terms of its impact, and what the opportunities that you've maybe maintained from that change.
Sure. Great question, very relevant. I guess just like everybody else, my university was in very much crisis mode back in 2020, and everybody had to become experts in Zoom and MS Teams practically overnight. Fast forward a couple of years later, I think people, at least in my university, my sense is, as far as teaching is concerned, there is a greater comfort level with the idea of a hybrid teaching. So we wouldn't mind, and I don't think the students would mind too much if part of the lessons are done online. Not the entire master's module, for example, but you know, sometimes we may have guest lecturers from another country, right? I mean, who can't really join us physically, but we can have them online through Zoom or whatever. And so I think post-COVID, as far as the teaching side is concerned, there seems to be, at least in my experience, a greater comfort level with hybrid teaching styles. In terms of research, yeah, I mean, it's just like what we're having this today. Right? This is a Zoom session, right? Very common nowadays. Seems to become part of the new normal, it seems, you know. But I think it's very important, and I think with my colleagues and I feel that this should not replace the in-person experience as far as research and networking is concerned, because we still need that. So I think we are still, as a school, we are trying to, you know, we only recently restarted having seminars, in-person seminars again, you know. Before that, past couple of years, been Zooming all the way, right? So as you know, the COVID restrictions have sort of like been loosened. Restrictions have been sort of like becoming a thing of the past, and travel has resumed. We are slowly beginning to return to like research visits, networking in person, which I think is very important. Nothing can replace that in terms of building trust, going back to building trust, you know. I think that's very important. So I think going forward, we'll probably have some level, an increased level of comfort with hybrid modes of communication, but it will never replace, to me, you will never replace the in-person communication, whether you're talking about teaching or research or networking. Yeah, thank you.
I think it is a very critical question, and it's something that we've deliberated a lot around. But post-COVID impact really is reflected in the exhaustion and the anxiety, both from staff and students. I don't think that kind of trauma is overcome in a couple of months. And what we're dealing with, for example, at this year, we're dealing with third years who have had 2 years of university experience that was abnormal. They didn't really understand what it was like to be in a class. They really were given a tough deal. And we see that in those third year students struggling a lot, also recognizing that the first years this year had this particular experience that was denied to me. So the justice in the system is really compromised. And students are experiencing that as frustrations. Just a quick example, the third year fashion students, for example, didn't get to have the experience of a fashion show, which the first year students might have had this year. So they feel denied in a lot of their experiences at university. And there's only so much one academic year can give you to sort of catch up that experience. So my heart really goes out to those students who were denied that true experience. But it's now, one of the challenges that we have to see how we are going to finish with those students. We certainly did hop onto the online blended hybrid approach, and we had no alternative. So for 2 years, we really did function in that hybrid space. And it's only in this 2022 that we have a somewhat normal, if I can call it a normal year. And it really has created opportunities for us. We've recognized that there are certain things that we can teach with great competence in an online space, but there are some things that we absolutely are non-negotiable about. The in-person experience, for example, in teaching dance or any performing arts, it's impossible to be able to do that in an online space. So we understand our limitations. And while we pushed ourselves to the limits during COVID, we now recognize what we really can do with great competence, but where the barriers are still existing. We also made some radical changes, for example, in assessment modalities, moving from exam terminating to sort of continuous assessment. So the assessment modality also changed. Our learning management systems, our online learning management systems have also been maximally used. And that required a different kind of stamina for the staff and the students, ordinarily, which they would probably not have utilized at such a level. Access to face-to-face, though, cannot, like Dr. Kumar says, cannot be replaced. Every university student does want a sense of belonging and a sense of home. And when they do have a challenge, they want to be able to go to an office, go to a staff member, get some comfort and clarity. And that kind of in-person experience cannot be replaced. And I think lastly, we must remember, my university is a contact university. So as much as we want to move more into that online space, we're not designed as a correspondence university. We are an in-person contact institution. And hopefully next year will be 1 year after many now that will be more peaceful, and we'll be able to make inroads in getting our students back to experience what it means to be a university student. I'll pause there.
So I might add a couple of things. Share absolutely everything has been said. What I think has sharpened sort of the university's focus is access and equity. I think University of Melbourne is also very much a face-to-face university. Everyone is expected to be on campus and work together. And now all of a sudden, since 2020, we realize more than ever that actually there are challenges for students. There were challenges even before COVID, and there were different issues faced by students for a number of reasons. That made their access to resources and university facilities easier or harder depending on the circumstances. So I think COVID has really made those challenges incredibly harder and clearer, and it's become an imperative for the university to address them in the best possible way. And also a rethinking of what we mean by place. So there's a university campus, but Melbourne is a big metropolis. Australia is a very international community. University of Melbourne has, I think, close to 40% international students. So COVID has thrown all sorts of challenges for the university, but also for the community, and has also radically changed the lifestyle and sense of identity of Melbourne as a place, as a city. All of a sudden, all the vibrant, incredibly diverse community that came to Melbourne to study disappeared, and it was a shock for many. This also, of course, means that there are big questions post-COVID around the international community. Will international students come back to Melbourne, to Australia? Australia has made it very hard for international students to come back. It's incredibly challenging, and there are very long waits. Takes up to a year or longer for visa to be processed. So what does that mean? Are we still going to be an international community? Are we still going to engage and learn from our international, very diverse community? I think similarly, there's a stronger sense that choices around curriculum, what is taught and how it's taught, so modalities of teaching, but also choices around topics, themes, and questions, I think have become, during COVID and post-COVID, more important than ever. And I think the last thing I wanted to mention, which goes back to what I mentioned before, is that the notion of internationalize, the importance for the university, but also for the community around it, to internationalize its operation, its commitment to working globally, has inevitably changed, and I think has affected, as we were saying before, now travel has become really difficult. So there are different questions now that are being posed post-COVID around how do we work in an international context? How do we enable networks and connections beyond the local? What will it be possible to do financially, but also in terms of planning into the future? So I think these are really, really big challenges, and I think they all, I think, from the perspective of what I've been working with my colleagues, I think the big picture there is really an issue around diversity and inclusion fundamentally, and how serious we need to be about enabling students and staff from underprivileged backgrounds to be able to achieve what they should be achieving in a context that doesn't make the situation harder, but actually a lot easier. And I think to some extent COVID is allowing that to happen because of the hybrid mode and the way in which we work from home and face-to-face, but I think there's still lots of challenges to address.
Well, thank you all for this conversation, and I think that that what is possible and where are we going? There's still a lot of questions. I know for us in our university, we've learned a lot, and we're continuing to learn from our students. We do have undergraduate programs, so we have freshmen, first-year students, and so I think my earlier comment about learning about where they are we do have the mental health right now is the big issue that we didn't talk about, but that's an extremely important issue that we're seeing, and faculty who are working with students are experiencing. And so the social, cultural kind of impacts that we've gone through in the last few years, and also the students and their preparation, their abilities to cope, the impact that we're going to see for year to year at this point, because in school many of them spent several years online, and so those are issues that are very boots on the ground kind of issues that we're day in, day out kind of having conversations about. But I want to thank you all for your insight and for sharing these wonderful, your context and what's going on in your campuses. Overall, we have very common themes. They look a little different, maybe but they're common themes of what the challenges are. But I also see and I hear from you the opportunities as we move forward, positive opportunities for change. And in higher education, as I said earlier, we have to be adaptable, we have to be flexible, and in order for us to be effective and meet the mission of each of our universities and just the mission of what higher education is. So again, thank you very much. Oliver, you've popped in. Did you want to say anything as we wrap up here?
Yeah, from our side, I mean, this has been fantastic, invigorating, I think inspiring. I think the one takeout for me was that we as colleagues from across the East to the West and to Australia, we can engage around these issues. And I really am deeply appreciative of the contributions made by the panelists today, and especially under your facilitation, Dolores. I also want to thank our colleagues at CCAS for co-hosting this session. Again, it speaks volumes of how one can collaborate when you have these commonalities in purpose, commonalities in objectives, and commonalities in mission. So it's been a great session. I really enjoyed it. Thank you to you. Thank you, Professor Kumar. Thank you to Professor Moodley. And especially thank you to Professor Rizzi. I hope you can go and take a nice, well-deserved rest now. And hopefully they'll give you the day off tomorrow. So good luck, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, afternoon, and good night. We'll see you all tomorrow again at 1 p.m. South African Standard Time. This was again a fantastic session. It was a fantastic day. So we look forward to having you all again. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.
Thank you
all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dolores.
Thank you. Bye-bye.